Hello, my name is Dan, and this is a video about a well-remembered Christmas tradition that once delighted holiday shoppers in Hartford, Connecticut. For many years, the marquee above the Main Street entrance to the G. Fox & Company department store was decorated with a Christmas village featuring scale recreations of iconic buildings from Connecticut's history. Lit up each night with lights until 11 p.m., the Christmas Village, together with the store's elaborate holiday window displays, gave shoppers unforgettable memories of the city and of the store that, under the leadership of Beatrice Fox Auerbach, was the largest privately owned department store in the country at that time. The G. Fox building was erected in 1918, but the long front marquee was not added until the early 1930s. Different holiday displays graced the marquee over the years, such as this one from 1957, which featured large candles and wrapped Christmas presents. But in 1959, the Christmas Village made its debut. Nostalgia for old-time New England had long been a feature of G. Fox's marketing and promotion. Back in 1939, the store had opened its restaurant called the Connecticut Room, which featured murals on the theme of Connecticut in 1847, the year G. Fox & Company first opened as a small fancy goods store. Like the later Christmas Village, the murals depicted Connecticut landmarks. These included the Wadsworth Athenaeum, the First Church of Christ in Farmington, and many others. The Marquee's Christmas Village would continue this tradition of depicting classic 18th and 19th century buildings, but also had a modern touch with the inclusion of a miniature version of one of G. Fox's distinctive blue delivery trucks. This picture shows a toy version of one of their delivery trucks from the early 1950s. There were actually two Christmas villages over the years. The original village of 1959 featured 7 buildings. 6 were reproductions of Connecticut landmarks, and the other was a general store not based on a single particular model. There was some minor reshuffling of the order of the buildings over several Christmases. In 1961, an old-fashioned candy store was added, along with 15 new figures of townsfolk designed by Harriet Fox of Canton, Connecticut. The village display itself was designed by artist Henry Rosenthal and was backed by a landscape painted by Wayne B. Morrill of Hartford. The actual buildings were constructed by John Oldham Studios of Wethersfield. By 1962, though, the buildings had been suffering the effects of time and a snowstorm. The village then disappeared for 5 years, but the public had loved it so much that in 1967 it returned with all new buildings. Again constructed by John Oldham Studios, this time there were only 5 structures, but additional landmarks like Mystic Seaport and West Cornwall's Covered Bridge were featured in the painted landscape backdrop. I'm not sure exactly how many more years the new village was displayed until it was eventually retired. So what were the historic structures recreated for these 2 iterations of the Christmas Village? As I mentioned, the original village had 6 historic recreations. In that first year, the building on the far left was the Commodore Charles Green homestead, which is located on Old Main Street in South Windsor. Built around 1850, the house is an example of the Gothic Revival style and was designed by Alexander Jackson Davis, the original architect of the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford. Next to the greenhouse was the G. Fox & Company truck I already mentioned. The next building was the brick gable-roofed home of Osbert Burr Loomis in the town of Windsor, a portrait painter and a founder of the Loomis Chaffee School. Osbert Burr Loomis was a member of the prominent Loomis family, which erected a number of brick houses in the Greek Revival style in Windsor in the 1820s and 30s. Next to the Loomis house was a recreation of the gambrel-roofed colonial house erected by the wealthy merchant Joseph Webb on Main Street in Wethersfield in 1752. It was in this house that George Washington met with the Comte de Rochambeau in 1781, and the two generals began planning the military campaign that would end with victory at Yorktown a few months later. The Webb House was painted white when the G. Fox Christmas Village was constructed. Later, around the time of the bicentennial, the real house in Wethersfield was repainted red. A few years ago, however, the house was repainted to reflect how it would have looked in the 1820s when its Greek Revival front portico was added. The house is now part of the Webb Dean Stevens Museum in Wethersfield. The center of a colonial New England town was the Meeting House, here represented by the Federal-style First Congregational Church of Litchfield, erected in 1829. The original building was later moved aside in 1873 to be replaced by a Gothic-style church, but in 1929 the Gothic church was torn down and the original 1829 building was restored to its former location, where it is still in use today. The next building, with its distinctive colonial saltbox shape, was the Noah Webster House. The real house was built in 1748 in West Hartford. Noah Webster, the lexicographer famed for his blueback speller and American Dictionary of the English Language, was born in the house in 1758. The Noah Webster House is now a museum and is also the home of the West Hartford Historical Society. Next to the Noah Webster House in the Christmas Village was the General Store, which, as I mentioned, was not a reproduction of a particular building. The last house in the village was the Nathan Hale Homestead, which is also a museum today. Located in Coventry, the house was built on the family homestead by Deacon Richard Hale in 1776. The same year his son Nathan was famously captured by the British and hanged as a spy in New York. The G. Fox Christmas Village's recreation of the house featured only part of the original building's long rear L. Right next to the Hale homestead, Santa Claus appeared in his sleigh pulled by reindeer. The first Christmas Village of 1959 featured a good representative sample of architectural styles. For the colonial period, the Webster and Hale homes were examples of colonial farmhouses, while the Webb House was a colonial merchant's mansion. Three major styles of the first half of the 19th century were also featured: the Federal, Greek Revival, and Gothic Revival styles. The various buildings also brought to mind a number of notable historical figures. The second Christmas Village of 1967 had fewer model buildings, but represented additional landmarks in the painted background, including the Nathan Hale Homestead. The village church featured this time was the 1826 Congregational Church in North Cornwall, also called the North Cornwall Meeting House. Turning to the other four buildings, they were again notable historical and architectural landmarks. One was the Henry Whitfield House in Guilford. Now a museum, it was built in 1639, which makes it the oldest house in Connecticut and the oldest stone house in all of New England. The 1876 Goodspeed Opera House is still in operation today, entertaining theater-goers in East Haddam. The grand side portico of the Cowles House in Farmington represents the delicate classical detailing of the Federal style. A brick house, it was built in 1803 by Solomon Cowles for his son George, who later served as the Adjutant General of the state of Connecticut from 1823 to 1834. The final building of the 1967 village brings us back to early colonial days. It recreates the facade of the Butoff Williams House, which is located on Broad Street in Wethersfield. Built in 1711, it is a classic center chimney house with diamond-paned casement windows. The house inspired the writing of the classic 1958 book, The Witch of Blackbird Pond, by Elizabeth George Sphere. Like the Whitfield House, the Butoff Williams House is also a museum today. The second G. Fox & Company Christmas Village continued the tradition of its predecessor. It presented two examples of the earliest colonial-style buildings, together with three ornate 19th century structures. Both the 1959 and the 1967 villages were treasured by local residents and the many visitors who came to Hartford during the holiday season, and they are still missed today by those who experienced them in person. The 8mm movie shown at the start of this video was recorded in December of 1960 by James H. Buchanan, a Hartford bus driver. You can find the full movie on Robert James Ellis's YouTube channel called Enjoy Today 2, which I'll link in the description below. I'll also link my two videos about the history of G. Fox & Company in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button. Remember to also hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.